Mirasee.
A lot of it, in some ways, is helping them learn how to frame things. So, for example, sometimes people are not particularly good at giving feedback because it'll come off harsh. They don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But if you help them learn how to frame feedback and be able to have those courageous conversations in a way that's respectful and diplomatic, then you start building that trust and that teamwork, and people become more open to the conversations.
I'm Sharon Richmond, and this is To Lead is Human. For nearly 40 years, I've run a business called Leading Large. I coach C-level executives to have greater impact, clarifying their priorities, energizing their organizations, and adapting their personal behaviors, and through all of this, building cultures of accountability and respect that deliver real market value. Today, I'm joined by Raymond, a forward-thinking leader with nearly 2 decades at the University of Minnesota. Eve's job as enterprise service owner has led large-scale technology implementations and change management initiatives affecting tens of thousands of end users. But her leadership journey began far outside of IT. As a bookstore manager, an assistant communications director on a U.S. Senate campaign, a marketing director for a publishing house, and a business manager for a startup that designed backpacks for professional women. A quote-unquote accidental technologist, Eve entered the field through her own small business venture. She's become known for guiding agile teams, shaping strategy, and championing people-centered solutions that make organizations more effective, more resilient, and ready for their future. Eve, thank you so much for making the time to join me on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm grateful to be here.
I think it's going to be a great conversation. So let's start with kind of a high-level overview of what you're doing now and a little bit about the journey that you've taken to get there, with an eye to your leadership approach, if it comes up in each of the segments.
Where I'm at now is the University of Minnesota within their central IT organization. And we have several frameworks that we work under. The ITIL will be familiar with some people, Scale the Agile framework. And so I'm what we call a service owner under ITIL. And I deliver an enterprise service around managing computers, making sure the university is safe, the employees and that use the university-owned computers, that they're doing that with security in mind and protections in place. And I also deliver software that they need for their teaching, research, and outreach activities. So it's a real balance. I sit at the crossroads between securing and protecting the university and enabling the mission. Before that, I was working at the university in an office manager position, and I was leading the staff in doing that. In the meantime, I started a business with a colleague there around improving people's websites. It was one of those situations where he said, I have a skill and I don't know how to market it. And I said, well, I know how to do the business side. I can lead that. So evenings and weekends, we launched that business, which is sort of how I accidental technologist myself. And in that office manager position too, we really collaborated on how we can do process improvement, how we can make things better for staff. What I've come to realize about my leadership is what I look for is it's better for the staff, it's better for the organization, it's better for the customer. Like if I can get that trifecta, then I really can make the case and we can move forward and everybody can be on board. So that's a lot of what I did in that mathematics institute within the university while I was going to grad school for library and information science, thinking I was going to be a book preserver. I was going to do book repair. I was going to bring these long forgotten, neglected objects back to their beauty. And that's what I thought I was going to spend my days doing. I could imagine it, the beautiful light coming in and me with all my paints and my various tinctures to make that happen. That is not what happened. I learned at that time that technology isn't magic, that actually you can understand it if you take the time to do a little learning and have the conversations, and you can find that intersection where you can at least speak the language and ask good questions. And again, that shows up later in the leadership path of how important that is.
Isn't it great to look backwards and you're like, in retrospect, it all makes so much sense.
Yeah, there's a line through, and I have to admit, I forgot. I was a marketing director for a bookstore that sold new books and was originally a publishing house. And they announced that they were $1 million in debt and they were going to have to close. And so I learned that I play a hero if I'm not careful. So I took it upon myself to try to save that place. And so I worked very, very hard, worked myself sick in all honesty. So that's another lesson learned that went on along with me to not do that.
I think what I'm hearing is a lot of different environments and a chance to pick up a lot of different skills, but also to work for a lot of different leaders, which gives us a chance to say, what did you learn from the leaders you work for that you carry forward with you?
What I learned from some of the leaders that I worked for was having a vision for what you wanted the organization to be and what fit and what didn't. Because as an employee with a lot of ideas that I was bringing, they needed to say no to me. And they had their reasons, they had their vision. And you've hired good people, you've hired experts in the field. You need to trust them to do that job. So that is certainly something, because I'm leading outside of my domain of expertise, that I take along with me.
Anything else you can think of from some of the other leaders?
I certainly had a leader at the Math Institute that saw herself as part of the team, but the leader of the team. And we saw her show up. She was never above making the coffee. And we knew we were supported, and we knew that we were all in it together to deliver on what we had promised. And then I do have an example of somebody who was really a challenging leader for me and caused me a lot of growth because of the challenges that we faced together. We had a real values misalignment. And so me working to work with this person who very much cared about the reputation of the space and the organization, and perhaps wasn't as in tune with the staff and how that was impacting them, has certainly caused me to check in very regularly with the staff that I work with, making sure not that they're the happiest people ever, right? Because work is work, but that they're on board, they understand, they're, I like to say, appropriately occupied, not busy. I don't think we all need to be busy all the time.
That's great. That makes a lot of sense to me. So if you were to describe your leadership today from a kind of a 30,000-foot level, how would you paint it?
The way I lead is understanding that we each have different roles to play and responsibilities. And I'm in this leadership position not because I'm any better or any worse than anybody else. And they're not in their position because they're any better or any worse than anybody. We have different roles and responsibilities. I have decision-making authority because of the view that I have from where I sit. But I need them to contribute. I need them to be part of it. And they're just as valuable as I am, and just as due respect for their opinions and their thoughts. And that's the way that I come to my teams.
Makes good sense, I think, in this day and age with so much data everywhere, some of which can be made into information and some of which can be made into noise. It doesn't seem reasonable for a leader to know everything about what's happening, to be the expert in everything in their organization. But I guess what I take from that is leadership is a craft separate from, is how I hear you talking about it. There's a craft to leadership, and it includes certain responsibilities and accountabilities. And recognizing the value of the people that are in your organization to contribute so that you can make good decisions.
Yeah. I let them know I couldn't do it without them. I tell them straight out, I cannot do this without you. I need you here with me and engaged on this. We spend so much time at work, and it doesn't need to be our complete purpose, but we want to make sure that we're spending our time doing something useful, meaningful to some extent, that somebody cares about it. And so by being that collaborative leader and engaging with them and showing them that I need them and they care, I'm hoping that it gives them some life satisfaction, and it also gives the organization the engagement that it needs to get to that mission and get delivery that we're looking for.
So anything else come to mind about how you navigate your leadership without domain expertise?
Not having domain expertise is an advantage because I can ask questions. I make up technology is what I tell. Oh, it's Eve making up technology again. But what if could we do something like this? Does that work like that? And they'll go, no, but if we this or that and the other thing, it'll get them thinking more creatively because I'm not coming from what the textbook would have said. I'm coming from the business perspective of what I'm trying to accomplish and letting those engineer brains really puzzle out that solution. So not having the expertise, but being willing to learn has been an advantage in a lot of ways. And then being a connector for them, being a resource to be able to say, I don't know, but I can try to connect you with someone else, or let's get you the education, let's develop you so that you can do that, you can understand that better. Because the university is a matrix model, I am not their managers, but I can still help develop them and I can still point them in directions of their interest in what will help us all.
That's a great segue into one of my favorite topics, which is large scale technology implementations definitely have a huge technical side. So I spent 3 years in the Change Leadership Center of Excellence at Cisco,
Oh, wow.
working with executives leading large changes. And so I know that there's that technical side, but there's also that human side. And so, how do you help this world of technologists embrace their human side and welcome the ways that they might be able to work better together?
The university uses the scaled agile framework, as I mentioned, and one of the really excellent parts about agile and scaled agile, especially, is there are these ceremonies where you get together and you do retrospectives on how did the work go. You're not talking about what did we do, it was how did we work. And that gives an opportunity to start building, thinking as a team, thinking about what we can do better, make an opportunity to start sharing. And really, a lot of it in some ways is helping them learn how to frame things. So, for example, sometimes people are not particularly good at giving feedback because it'll come off harsh. They don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But if you help them learn how to frame feedback and be able to have those courageous conversations in a way that's respectful and diplomatic, then you start building that trust and that teamwork, and people become more open to the conversations. We have one of our staff member who, of his own admission, can be kind of a naysayer, brings up what all might be a problem and what we're planning to do. And I've tried to reinforce that person actually and saying, no, we need your voice. We absolutely need you to be bringing up these concerns you have. It's how we talk about them and how you bring them up that is the big difference here. And I've said that to him privately, and I've actually said that to him in front of the team when he's said, I know I'm being negative here. I've brought it up to help them then have the words to help him.
I think engineers in general, technologists in general, have a reputation of not being very skillful at interacting with each other. So, what are some of the tips that you offer your team members if they're struggling with that? Like, how do you frame feedback for them, for example?
If I'm going to teach somebody how to do feedback, it's usually the model of here's what I've observed, here's what I think the impact was, and here's what I'd suggest for the future. It's very simple. It's very common. I'm sure you've heard of it many times, but it works. It really works.
I am so grateful, Eve, that you didn't say the sandwich method because I hate the sandwich method. All it does is take all the power out of the kernel of truth in the middle, and it treats people like they're not grown up enough to hear what is and isn't working. So the way that I would frame what you just said is there's a difference between our intention and our impact. And we need to be clear, if we're having an impact we didn't intend, how do we pull it back and try again? How do we own up to it? So I think it's quite similar to what you said. I just really am glad, so glad you didn't say sandwich. Sorry for all you people out there who have been told that sandwich feedback is good. Text me and I'll tell you why it's not. So you've built and coached multiple Agile teams. I've not ever coached an Agile team. What are the key ingredients for creating that culture where people are empowered and accountable and keep each other informed pretty much all the time?
It starts with vision. They need to understand what their goals are, the big picture, but you don't want to paint it with too much detail. You want them to understand what the business needs right now. I've heard Agile described as not having the blueprint for a rocket that you can't move away from, and you start building it and run out of money halfway through, right? You need to help the team prioritize. Well, we need an engine that works and we need the exterior structure. So then we're going to get to space. Minimum viable product, right? And helping them really hone in on that. And then the way it works is they have features that we create together. Co-creation is really important to me. I don't want to be coming in and saying, you must. I certainly get to weigh in and we can have a negotiation and we all understand why what gets chosen gets chosen. And I think they would tell you that I'm totally willing to have my mind changed about what priorities should be. So that's part of it, is giving them co-creation into the products that we're releasing out there. And then they represent as a team. They are in it as a team. They break down the feature together into the different, we call them stories, of what they need to do, who it's serving. And then they're checking in with each other regularly, sometimes daily, sync ups on where are we at? How do I need help? And then at the end of 2 weeks, they're supposed to have something to show for it. So it's the accountability of the regular ceremonies, the accountability of everybody knows what everybody's supposed to be working on, and then the celebration that we get to have at the end because we've done something as a team.
So, one of the things that a lot of the executive teams I work with kind of struggle with is when one of your peers isn't keeping up their commitment. And so I'm curious, how do your agile teams manage that, or how do you encourage them to address such situations?
Just this week, I met with one of my team members because the product owner, who is another one of the team leaders, and the scrum coach, who is supposed to be holding the team accountable and keeping track of where we're at in stories and our burn down and all of that. They came to me and they had some concern that this person wasn't engaged, wasn't contributing. So I had a meeting. I am fortunate enough, I think, because of my leadership style, to have relationships with these team members where I can say, hey, you want to get together? Let's have a coffee. And I got together with this person and I just checked in on life. Didn't approach that situation in particular. And then I asked, how are things going on the team? Where are you feeling stuck? Where are you feeling positive? What would make you feel more engaged, more excited about the work that we're doing? We ended in a really positive conversation, a positive place. We had a bunch of new features and things to go after together. And so I was really checking in human to human because there's all kinds of stuff that goes on in all of our lives. Referencing my 360, one of my staff made a note, I don't know who, said, Eve's going to have to teach us how she remains so calm in these chaotic situations. And ultimately, it's because it doesn't really matter that much, right? Nobody's going to die. We're going to get through it. We've done that before. So it really is taking that moment to check in with people, see them as people, and get them redirected and re-engaged on what we're working on. Because the scrum coaches and the immediate team leads are supposed to be keeping track of how we're doing and getting that work done. And it becomes pretty evident in the metrics when people aren't delivering.
Maybe we could switch a little bit to the kind of large scale change part of this. So you have teams that are creating the technology that will bring the changes. How do you manage the change that affects so many end users, thousands sometimes? How do you do that in such a large organization where so many people might have to change a little something about their day job and may or may not be super happy about that?
Absolutely. It's a major part of my job and it's really challenging. And I am one of 22 or more. I mean, there are changes happening in finance and HR on top of IT. So there's constant change. And we certainly have change fatigue, political climates, and funding sources. I mean, everybody's dealing with a lot. So then you come along with this IT change, which is probably going to make their life a little bit more difficult. Like I said, I sit at that crossroads between security and enabling the mission. So a lot of times it's not something they want to do. And we're also complicated by the fact that budgets are distributed. So there is a chance for them to go around me and not do what I'm asking them to do. And that makes it extra challenging. So I make a huge effort around where are we going? What is the end user impact going to be? I start the communication plan. We do have a wonderful communications team that I get to work with, but usually I need to create the plan and they'll help fill in and help me get things published. So I think a lot about what is that end user impact going to be? Who are the stakeholders I need to get on board first, and understanding why this change is happening. And if I can find a reason other than compliance, I will go for that because we always are saying compliance, compliance, compliance. So what's in it for that other person? One of the changes we made, as an example, we locked down administrative rights on devices so people couldn't make changes because that's a huge security risk. And I had a professor say, "You're treating me like a child." And I said, well, with all due respect, I'm treating you like a high value target for malicious actors. So I needed to change that mindset and make them feel important and that I'm working to protect them because that is what I'm doing.
What a terrific reframe of that situation. And I hope listeners out there are taking note of this, because often the security things that are being introduced these days are for this very reason, to protect you from being a target. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody quite say it that way before. So that's really great. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're working on another one to talk about where people back up their data and that they shouldn't be storing it locally, because ever since the pandemic, oh my gosh, how many cats spill water on everybody's computers at home and the computer is dead. So many cats and so many glasses of water. So we're trying to get people to store their data somewhere else. And instead of being about, this is not a good idea, you shouldn't do this, it's, we want to make sure your data is protected. We want to make sure you have your stuff and you are not taken down from the work that you're trying to do. It's still available and it's backed up and secure. So making it what's in it for them is a really big part of what I try to do when I can. So we have various communication channels that I can leverage for changes like this, but I do try to give the users sometimes 6 months. There's one change that we just did, moving from Windows 10 to Windows 11. We've been working on that for 2 years, and we've been starting getting the easy stuff out and then starting upgrading things, and we've communicated with users multiple times because they had to get rid of old computers that wouldn't go up to 11, right? And times are thin. People don't have a ton of resources. So getting rid of a functional computer doesn't make a lot of sense to them, but it's a necessary thing, again, for compliance and security. So walking them through, giving them plenty of time to budget, giving them time so that it's not a shock, making sure I've tried to communicate multiple ways. It's not just email. We pop up on the computer. We make sure that their leaders know, understand why that's important, prioritize it, bring them along with us as much as we possibly can, have communication methods, have places they can ask questions, and talk them through that. So yeah, it's a big undertaking when we have to make a big move.
So this is probably a hard question, but in your experience, what makes the difference between a change initiative that sticks and really takes off versus one that fizzles out?
When we were trying to change how administrative rights were done, I inherited that actually from my predecessor. And the approach at the time was, we'll just do it through attrition. And what that caused was inequity. And nobody knew that this program was happening because they were just doing it in the background as computers were leaving, as people were leaving. And so it's that communication piece again. It's the why. It's getting the executive buy-in. Executive stakeholder buy-in is so key to everything. Support from around the organization. And then being transparent about what you're doing, making it clear, making it equitable. We went through units by units and we explained what we were doing, and we got chunks of machines off, not just waiting for someone to leave or a device to leave.
What I heard you say is the big difference is making sure that there's a clear understanding of why we're doing it now, what it's going to mean, the benefits, the what's in it for me that everybody wants to hear about, and also the reality of there are reasons why we have to do this, but there are also reasons why we want to do this, and really differentiating between those two things. So it doesn't just feel like somebody's bossing you around and making your life hard. Kind of makes me think of the book that Huggy Rao and Bob Sutton wrote on friction and whether friction is good or bad in organizations. And of course, the answer is friction can be good. Friction can be bad, but intentionally putting friction in places for security and safety, I think, is maybe a good example of that necessary friction.
Yeah, we're working on a project that will be a huge change for the university around how we purchase software. And we're building the happy path, but everyone has their own budgets and could go around the happy path. The goal is to make those unhappy paths more full of friction and it easier to take the happy path. It's the one that will get them what they need the fastest without the concerns about the bureaucratic slowdowns. So that is how we try to change in a culture that's so independent, and intellectual freedom is really important to all of them, which translate in some ways to independent behavior, independent action, which we are an organization, and in a lot of ways we should be acting like it.
That's definitely a challenge in academic environments. I can certainly say I've experienced that as well. So I mean, let's switch gears back to you and your personal leadership learning. And one of the things our listeners love the most, I think, about this show is when leaders share those crucial moments where they had to learn something about themselves and switch around some way of doing things. So, can you think of any pivotal moments in your own leadership where you had a hard lesson to learn? You took some tough feedback, and how did you make sense of it and decide what to do?
I received some feedback from one of my supervisors around executive presence, in fact, and it took me a lot to try to understand what she was trying to tell me. And I did a lot of self-reflection on that. And I watched videos of myself in meetings trying to understand, for me, what did executive presence mean? I read, because that's my style, tons of research, data collection, talked to a ton of people. And what it comes down to, I think, is executive presence can be really authentic and unique to you, but there is an aspect of, and I'll paraphrase Muriel Wilkins, just voice for self and voice for the greater organization, voice for others. Being able to speak to the needs of your team and the needs of your area, but understand how it's positioned in the greater organization and what the greater organization needs. And then I think that leader was really just trying to get me to speak up more because I am an introverted, shy person. So inserting myself into these rooms with engineers, understanding, which I feel like I do now, that I can lead in these domains, I can have these conversations with vendors, with the engineers, without being an engineer, without being a computer science major. It doesn't make me an imposter. It makes me somebody who's got other skills and other value to bring to the table. I've decided that I'm only an imposter if I'm pretending to be something I'm not. And that helps me show up as an executive because I'm confident in myself.
I love that. I think that does kind of get right to the basics of it, which is a confidence and a comfort sitting in authority, which I guess is sometimes hard. Maybe it's a little harder for women sometimes in some environments. I don't think it would be quite fair if we didn't acknowledge that it can be harder because there's a fine line between being liked and being respected,
Absolutely. Yep.
and it can be a narrow thing to walk. So, how do you guide yourself down that path?
I'm definitely willing to call my team out when they need to be called out. And that's not necessarily the way that they respect me, but that is part of feeling empowered to be able to speak up, not worry about being liked, not worry about being seen as dumb, and push for what is needed, be the director that they need me to be.
It's a kind of a hard lesson to learn, I would imagine.
Yeah, it took a lot of effort because I'd always seen myself as a leader. I'd viewed the fact that I was quiet as a strength, which I still think it can be. I still think our society in particular rewards people who speak up the soonest and the loudest. And I think there needs to be space for people who are thoughtful and might need to give their opinion a day later after they've done some data gathering and some thinking about it. And I always thought, I will sit back. I don't need to restate what's being said just to have my voice heard. But when I speak, people listen because they know I don't speak unless it's really something needed. What I've learned, though, in this leadership position, they do need to hear from you. They do need to hear your voice supporting them or questioning them. Even if it is something someone else said, it means something different coming from you.
Appreciate that. So, what's your current learning edge? What are you working on these days in terms of improving your own leadership?
It's a great question. I've always been really interested in organizational development, even though I didn't know what it was called for a very long time. And people suggested that I might even go into that someday. And so I started my professional development journey learning about organizational development, which encompasses so much, change management that I do all the time, but the coaching aspects and the strategizing about organizational design and all of that. So I've really been going down that route and reading as much as I can. I'm part of a professional network and going to workshops and connecting with a lot of OD practitioners. I was just at one last night and we sort of collaborated. Somebody brought a case study after the workshop was over. She said, I could really use your help. And so we all just swarmed a table and she laid out here are the characters and here's what's going on in the organization. And listening to all these seasoned practitioners give advice throwing out my ideas and seeing what people reacted to. That was a very exciting learning for me just last evening. But yeah, learning more about how to help organizations be the best they can be for the people that they serve and the people that work there. It's really important to me.
So, what did you take away from last night in terms of your leadership?
What I took away from last night in part was that I know what I'm talking about, that I
Yay!
deserve to be in the room, right? Um, because, yeah, I haven't been a consultant for 20 years. I wasn't entirely sure of my gut here. Last night, the topic was the drama triangle and the victim, villain, and hero. And I realized that some of the things I engage on are because I want to be the hero. And can I change that, as they described last evening, to be coach? Creator, challenger, and coach were the different framing. Can I move to that empowerment triangle and out of that drama triangle?
So, for folks that don't know, can you just draw the connections between those words real quick?
So victim is, it's all happening to me. These people are terrible. I have no control. And then the villain, of course, is the situation or the people or the whatever is happening that's causing that to happen to the victim. And then, of course, the hero, I'm going to swoop in, I'm going to fix it all, I'm going to make everything better. And the problem is that you can be all of those things all at once. In your own view of it, and other people, you can be the villain for somebody and the victim for somebody. And so you just stay entrenched in this drama. One of the examples where the CEO thought he was being a hero by supporting both of the people in the conflict. But in fact, that was causing them both to be victims because they both thought they were right. And then they each had anyway, it's just messy.
It is.
But then if you change to an empowerment triangle and you get the creator that has the capacity to make change, the capacity to take action, to say, what is in my control and what can I do to improve the situation? The challenger could be a situation, of course, that's inspiring action, pushing toward a different state. And then the coach is helping that creator say, what can we do? You can do it. And pushing them along and helping them find their own path to making the thing better.
Thanks, Eve. I know people talk about the drama triangle, but I'm not sure how many people really have understood it. So that was a really nice description. Thanks.
Well, yeah, hopefully I got it right because I just learned it last night. So.
That's what you took away. So that's the reality in your head today, and it's good enough. So much of workplace culture is driven by how we use language. And I actually really love the very precise use of language. And so that's one of the reasons why I named this podcast To Lead is Human. And I'm wondering what this phrase means to you in the context of your leadership.
It brings to mind two different interpretations for me. One is about the fact that there is a human that's leading, right? They're leading humans. And we have to remember that people come with their different motivations. They come with their different circumstances. They come with their different backgrounds. So we are all humans in this together, trying to find a way forward. And then the other sense of it, what it evokes for me is I bring all of me to this leadership. Is my whole human, all my failings, all my successes, all my bad traits and my good traits, and all the things I'm striving for, and all the things that I'm made of. So leading is my whole human.
I love that. I would add to it that I just think it's a natural thing that human beings naturally lead and follow. And we lead sometimes and we follow sometimes, but it's completely reasonable, normal, and human to take leadership, to step up and be the guide when one is needed. And so I guess what I would add to your statement, but I really love that bringing your whole human self into the role.
I like that.
So if you were going to give a piece of advice to leaders, I'm going to say specifically in your field, because I do think that leading large-scale technology changes, transformations is so difficult. What would you offer for those folks that really want to blend the strategic necessity, the strategic goals, with the empathy needed to orchestrate such a large change? What's the thing that people miss from your perspective?
Well, this comes a little bit from pro-sci, but it's the fact that change is individual. It is happening to and for an individual, and it's going to impact them in ways that you may not foresee. Not thinking of it as a big organization, but as a collection of individuals that you need to bring along with you and having empathy and compassion for them as you do that work.
And how can somebody show up like that, do you think?
I keep thinking about the fact that when I started as a business relationship manager, I was kind of all business. I wanted to get into the business and I had to learn how to ask people how their weekends were. And then I had to learn how to actually care about the answer for that. And I think you can learn it. I really do. Having curiosity about other human beings, understanding how you connect and how you can connect, it will take a little bit of work for some, a little bit more work for some, but I do think it can be learned.
And I think it makes a huge difference.
It does. I made friends in that role that I stay connected with to this day, and they help me make changes now and communicate things. Not that I'm using them because they are my friends, but they are my friends and they understand where I'm coming from and I understand what their needs are, and we work together to make it happen for the organization.
The word that comes to my mind just listening to you is there's some joy in the work.
Oh, for sure.
There's some joy. You have connections with people that you care about and they care about, and you have shared goals. And work in a moment like that is less drudgerous and a lot more joyful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm all about joy at work. Thank you, Eve, so much for your time. I'm so grateful for the insights that you've shared and your reflection and your vulnerability. So if folks want to find you online, know more about you, how can people find you out in the world?
I think they can find me on LinkedIn.
Well, I found you on LinkedIn, so I can say that works.
Okay. People can find me on LinkedIn. Done.
That's great. Thanks again for joining me on the show.
Thank you so much.
Stay with me for a few moments, and I'll share with you some takeaways from my conversation with Eve, as well as a couple of coaching tips that you can implement right away. My conversation with Eve Raymond was a quiet masterclass in leading from authenticity, especially for introverted leaders who don't always see themselves reflected in the usual image of executive presence. Eve leads a large-scale technology change at the University of Minnesota, but she's not a technologist by training. She calls herself an accidental technologist, and yet she guides teams of engineers through complex, high-stakes work with confidence and grace. Eve's credibility doesn't come from her technical expertise. It comes from her leadership capabilities and the trust, integrity, and calm that she displays as a leader. In our conversation, she said to me, I'm in this leadership position not because I'm any better or worse than anyone else. We just have different roles and responsibilities. That's leadership as a craft, built on how you relate, not what you know technically. And across her story, 3 pivotal shifts stood out to me. First, from hero to coach. Early in her career, Eve worked herself sick trying to save a failed organization. She learned that being the hero will burn you out, and it keeps others small. Now she empowers people instead of rescuing them, moving from fixing to facilitating solutions. That's a mindset worth borrowing. Second, from silent competence to visible leadership. As a self-proclaimed introvert, Eve once believed her quiet thoughtfulness would speak for itself. But she has learned over time that her team and her organization need to hear her voice. When I speak, she says, people listen because I don't speak unless it's needed. But I've learned they still need to hear my voice, supporting them or questioning them. So she's reframed executive presence as being authentic and visible, not loud or polished. As she says, I'm only an imposter if I'm pretending to be something I'm not. That's leadership confidence rooted in truth. And third, from compliance thinking to compassionate exploration. In Eve's world, change management often means enforcing policies that people are not that interested in implementing. But what Eve has discovered is that she leads through meaning, not mandates. She says change is individual and that it's happening to and for each person, so you need to really pay attention to how it's going to impact them in ways that you may not foresee. She gave a great example of when a professor complained that she was, quote, treating me like a child with some of the security mandates. And Eve replied, with all due respect, I'm treating you like a high-value target we're protecting. That single reframe turned resistance into partnership and moved the conversation from control to care. Eve's evolution from fixer to facilitator, from more silent to more audible, and from compliance to compassion reveals her unique human-centered authority. She shows that introverted leaders can lead powerfully through their reflection and curiosity and grounded integrity. Sometimes the quickest answer isn't the most important one, and the calmest voice in the room is the one people trust the most. If you're looking to develop in some of the ways that Eve has developed, here are a few coaching tips for you. Trade fixing for framing. When problems come up, resist the natural leadership urge to jump in and solve. Instead, focus on how you can frame the challenge so others can solve the problem. You, as the leader, build capacity in your team members by clarifying purpose and outcomes, not by owning all the answers. Second, practice visible calm. Your team doesn't need volume, they need steadiness. So let them see your composure and hear the truth that settles the room. When you say to them, we'll figure this out together. And the third is, when you're leading change, focus on the impact on the individuals and what it will mean to them. In other words, when change feels hard, start with empathizing and ask, what's in it for you? What can I do to help this change benefit you? As Eve pointed out, reframing compliance as protection and policy as purpose brings meaning of a different kind to the large-scale technology implementations that most organizations struggle through. As it turns out, people don't really resist the change itself. They resist being told they have to change and feeling unseen and unvalued. Eve's story reminds us that leadership doesn't have to sound loud to be strong. It's about showing up as your whole human self with clarity, groundedness, and being real. So this week, try leading a little more like Eve. Listen deeply, speak only when it matters, and let your calm, not your control, be what fuels others' courage. Because to lead is human, and to lead humanly, whether it's quiet or loud, is the strongest form of power that there is. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. If you've taken an idea away that you think is practical and you're going to try it out, let me know how it goes. Share a thought with a colleague or friend. And of course, I know this is a silly request, but like and subscribe to the podcast because it raises it in people's feeds and helps us reach more people. See you next time on To Lead is Human.